can start. Okay, yes, so the title, as you can see, is Innovating and Leading in a Post-COVID World. And I really think it is quite important just to reflect a little bit, as Giuseppe has done at the beginning of the day, about the conditions that we are facing in the 21st century. And I think sort of we are all very well aware of the wider context, also known as the VUCA context. Is everyone familiar with VUCA, the term? VUCA stands for volatile, which means that fluctuations are really high. The most obvious example I always find is actually the weather predictions that have become absolutely unstable. If you traveled a couple of years ago, you could, or 5-10 years ago, you could look at the weather before, a week before you went to a place and arrive a week later, and the weather forecast would still be relatively true. That is no longer the case. So, you know, whatever we are trying to predict is fluctuating wildly. The U stands for uncertainty, and which means that when you are making a decision, we like to think that we are in control, that we can influence the outcome. And while we might be able to do so to a certain degree, the uncertainty of the implications of our actions has increased dramatically. Also, the second letter, the C, stands for complex, whereas in the past we felt that there are sort of linear relationship between things. I think we are now starting to realize that there are systemic consequences. So one thing triggers a feedback loop here, has an implication there, and the interactions are very difficult to predict and forecast. And then the final one, A, stands for ambiguous, and I don't know which animal you see when you're looking at the last image, but you might see a rabbit or you might see a duck, and both are true. And so this ambiguity means it is very difficult to really interpret things with great clarity. And so, of course, on top of all of that, we have the new ways of working, which really have changed significantly on how we interact. For example, I'm still shocked that Siemens was one of the first companies who announced that all their training would henceforth be done online and online only. And I think, you know, with this, while there is a lot of potential and opportunity in this remote working, in this new way of working, I think people also need to really understand the importance of coming together in the same space as we are doing here. And so if we are looking at how we are getting there, how did we get there? How did these conditions arise? I'd like to share sort of five key, or what I consider to be the 5 key drivers that have led to these VUCA conditions. The first thing is that change really has increased. We are seeing more change, the introduction of more change than we've ever seen before. And I know there's always been the argument, yes, we have always changed, and there has always been changed, and I could not agree more. But the rate at which change is being introduced has increased dramatically since the millennium. And what is slightly worrying is that the fact that the way we think about leadership has not really changed. So the context in which we're operating has changed, but the way we are leading in this context has not, and that is a problem in my view. The second thing is that everything is connected. And if you just think, well, yes, I know we've got the Internet of Things and it's all quite wonderful, of course, that everything is connected has also consequences. And some of the consequences we felt back in 2008 when a company in the United States collapsed, and as a consequence there was a worldwide felt economic crisis, whether it was the volcano in Iceland that impacted aviation industry almost globally, whether it is the stuck tanker in the Suez Canal from a few years, from last year, that has caused problems with the supply chains worldwide, or whether it is the war between Ukraine and Russia that is felt globally. We in Europe are feeling it particularly with the energy problems. Africa is feeling it in particular with food supplies. So everything is connected, and whatever is happening in one part of the world tends to affect the rest of the globe. The third one is what I call convergence, mainly because it also has got a C in it, and all these things start with a C. You could also call it that boundaries are disappearing. And so most of us have a smartphone, and just think about all the functionality, all the products and services that were previously separate, provided by players in separate industries, that are now all coming together in one device. So this one device has affected all industries almost. I don't think there are many that have not been affected. Of course, you could also call it digitalization, but I think it is really, for me, it is symbolized by this one. And what has also happened, and you know, amplified manifold by the COVID crisis, is the disappearance of a boundary between our personal and our professional lives. If I had asked you in 2007, which is when the smartphone, the first iPhone was introduced, would you like to engage in work activities 24/7, 365? You would have said, you know, why would I want to do that? Are you completely stupid? But today, certainly I am doing it, and most of the people I know write emails, answer emails in the evenings, over the weekends, during the holidays. So the boundaries are disappearing, and I could spend another 10, 15 minutes explaining why it is a problem, which I will not do. Suffice to say that our brain is organized in little boxes in a way. So our brain likes to know which box something belongs into. And by this convergence, by this disappearing of boxes, our brain doesn't quite like that, and it needs more energy to figure out what things are. The fourth one is that we as consumers, as a consequence of all the above, have changed. We've got access to almost limitless information. Whether I want to know how to bake a cake or make a Molotov cocktail, I go online and I will find the information. And by having that information, I don't know about you, but when you go to a doctor, do you look up beforehand what your symptoms might be? So we are sort of have a semi-education in terms of when we are buying something, we inform ourselves. When we are making other decisions, we are trying to access the information that is available to inform us. And so as a consequence, we are no longer willing just to take what is given for us. And so from an organizational perspective, people no longer want to be stuff that's just made for them, but they want to be engaged, they want to be involved. So if we are doing things, and if we want to overcome people's resistance to change, then we want to do it with them, not for them, which is a change. And I mean, we've got all the necessary technology infrastructure to enable that. And then the final one, and in my view most critical one, is actually the challenges that we as humanity and that our planet is facing. And you know, when COVID started, it was, well, you know, wash your hands and, you know, do that regularly and sanitize and all the rest, and everything will be fine. Completely forgetting all the stuff that comes behind it, like the recession, right, like the climate change, and what probably is worst of all, the loss of biodiversity. And if we are thinking about, you know, how that all happened, is that if we are looking back about 40, 60 years, we as humanity were using about 73% of biocapacity. Biocapacity refers to the amount, to what our planet can reproduce within a year's time. So there's 100% biocapacity is what the planet can reproduce in a year's time. And if we're looking what we have been using a couple of years ago, it was 160%. Now, anyone who has just the slightest understanding of mathematics should know that we cannot continue to use 160% of what we have. Yeah, exactly. Giuseppe just said it, you know, the key word is exponential. The challenge that we are facing increasing exponentially. There is no linear relationship because we've got less and less and less from what we use. So these are the 5 drivers of the conditions we are seeing today. So it is the increased rate of change, it is the connectivity, it is the convergence, it's the change in our consumer behavior, and it is the challenges to humanity. And when we are taking these 5 together, what we are finding is the perfect storm of complexity, as I've been calling it for a while now. And so it is the key difference between our times and last century is that our times are highly complex and no longer complicated. And it is an important differentiation because if something is complex, I can analyze it, I can take it apart, which helps me to understand it. And if something is complicated, I can influence its behavior. I can manipulate it, I can change things, and I will know with almost certainty what the outcome is. But if I'm living in a highly complex context, which is the interactions that exist. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to predict things. And so therefore, in order to survive and thrive in complexity, I need to behave and act and lead very differently. So how can we thrive in a post-COVID complex context? Again, sort of a couple of C's that I have to offer. The first thing is, because things are changing so quickly, we can no longer do things sequentially as we have been used to for a long time. In particular, I mean, in new product development, it has changed some time ago, but very often it was, well, actually this is, so it's going from this to that. And basically this was the old way, the customary way of doing things. And we can no longer afford that because it just takes too long and we have to go, even though it looks like a linear process, very often as you reach the design stage and find something doesn't work, so you need to go back. Or you come into development and you realize you've forgotten something and you need to go back. And so it is really not surprising that we've moved to agile methods, which try to bring everyone around the table and together right from the outset. So the first thing we need to learn to do better is to do things concurrently rather than sequentially. The second thing is that in order to be able to do that, of course, we need to collaborate more than ever before. And while I know that organizations work a lot in teams, the kind of collaboration that is required is much more the collaboration across boundaries, across organizations, across departments, across mindsets. And of course, that is not always very easy, because we prefer people who are like us, because we understand them. We don't need to defend our actions, we don't need to explain our actions. People will just nod and smile. Whereas if they've got a different way of thinking, they will say, but why are you doing it like that? And, no, that's wrong. I'm doing it differently. And so that's something that we need to learn on how to overcome. And so if we are thinking about successful collaboration, it's helpful just to keep two things in mind. That if we can establish a rationale that all the collaborators can buy into, i.e. they have a shared goal, a shared ambition, there's a shared sense of urgency, a shared need, that is really helpful. And also really important, it's an emotional component. Because if you think about it, if someone asks us to do something and they are our friend, we will willingly do it. And we might not ask as many questions as if someone asks us whom we don't like or don't respect. And in order to reach the solutions that we need to address the challenges that our planet is facing, we do really need to have highly diverse groups, people of coming together, so that we can hear and find the unlikely ideas, the ideas that really make a difference. And we will only find them when we are trusting and respecting those who are very different from us. And I really think the rationale, yes, is very important. But I think really this realizations that we need diversity in order to succeed, that we need different viewpoints. So the trust and respect is the more important aspect out of these two. So the second one is collaboration. The third one is co-creation, and it really builds on the previous one, because we cannot, if we continue to extrapolate, to continue on the path that we are already on, we will never be able to solve the challenges, to face the challenges that we are facing. And so there is this framework that helps us understand on what kind of approach leads to success given different scenarios. So I think it is very clear that incremental innovation is no longer enough. So we do need radical or transformational even innovation. And I hope that you agree with me that the context in which we are living is hugely complex. So we are living in a context where the environmental complexity is high and where innovation that is required is radical. And the only way to do that is through co-creation, through co-evolution. And one of the biggest challenges with that is that when you are going into that box on that journey, you will not have the control that you would like. You will not have the certainty that you feel you need. You will not have the knowledge of what the outcome will be. You need to start that journey despite of it. Otherwise, you will not come to the solutions that are required. And the fourth one is, I believe that we need an approach that is more caring. We just cannot afford to, to have the us and them attitude. And I think, a great example on getting us onto the right path are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which I think is quite amazing that all the members of the United Nations have been able to agree on them about 7 years ago. And it is all, or so much of it is about equality, about fairness. And if you think about that, 0.01% of the global population, which is about 520,000 people, own 10% of global wealth. And I would say that's a bit of a challenge, a bit of a problem. So, if we are knowing what the context is, on what has shaped or driven the context, i.e., the 5 C's, and then on what is required to embrace them, to deal with them, the 4 C's, what does it mean to lead in a post-COVID context? First of all, I'd like to share sort of a definition of leadership that I 100% subscribe to, which is leadership is about inspiring others to higher levels of performance. And so, leading post-COVID in a complex world, what we need is, we basically, because everything is so uncertain and difficult to predict, we need the ability of leaders to detect patterns, because we will not get a clear picture, so we need to learn to look for patterns. And leaders need to be able to understand on how, to see the patterns, and then how to translate them into clear visions that provide directions, so that enables everyone else to engage and contribute. The second thing we need from leaders is that in order to really engage with others, in order to do things in a speedy and timely manner, they really need to understand who they are, what their contribution is, what their skill sets is, what their weaknesses are, and they, pretending that leaders should know everything, as seemed to have been the case in the last century. Like, leaders are the ones who know it all, or at least who feel. We need leaders who actually can say, well, actually, I don't know, and they need to know with whom to collaborate to get the full picture. A third aspect is that due to the speed at which changes are occurring, and as well as the urgency with which we need to address these challenges, we don't really have time for political games. We don't really have time for egos playing out on stage, saying, but this is mine and you can't have it, and I will not share. I don't think we really have time for that. And then the last one is we need leaders who have the humility and the courage to let go of what I think is an illusion of control. And that is, again, coming back to the 4 boxes that I had, where it is the co-evolution. In co-evolution, you do not have the control, at least not of the outcome. You have the control of whether you start and the decisions you make and the journey you go on, but you are not really in control in the way that we are used to and that we would actually like. So, 4 aspects of leadership that I think support this kind of leadership that we need, and this one builds on my third point on the previous slide, is that we need leaders who are authentic. We need to know what people stand for. And this is a piece of research by the same chap whose quote on whose definition of leadership I like, Rob Goffey and his colleague Gareth Jones. They have done a lot of work with leaders, and they found that successful leaders tend to be authentic leaders, and authentic leaders tend to have those 4 characteristics, which means the situation sensing means they are walking in the room and they know the atmosphere. They can, they can sense whether people are comfortable or, yeah. And I think not only that, but they also know on how to take that mood forward in an appropriate direction. They are able to show tough empathy, and tough empathy means that, well, yes, I understand your position, and I listen, and I care, and I will have the courage and strength to make the decisions that are necessary in order to achieve the agreed goal. So it is, yes, I hear what you're saying, I see where you are coming from, and I know that I might have to make some tough decisions because that's the only way we can get to where we need to be. Authentic leaders reveal their weaknesses so they know what they're, coming back again to what I've just said, they know what they are good at, they know where they need to ask for help. But it's not only that, by revealing their weaknesses, they are also allowing others to come on board, to help them, to support them. And they dare to be different. So they are not trying to fit in, to be streamlined, to look at what everyone else is doing so that they can do the same. But they know what they stand for, and they are following that lead. That's the first one. The second one, that's a quote by Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who said, "We teach kindness and empathy and compassion to our children. But then we somehow, when it comes to political, and I would put in brackets other leadership, want a complete absence of that. So I'm trying to chart a different path that will attract critics, but I can only be true to myself." And I could not agree more. The second one, how many of you are familiar with the concept of servant leadership? Have heard of that before? So where the traditional model is basically the organization works to support the CEO and the board of directors, servant leadership turns the whole thing on its head. It's the role of the leaders to support the organization and to ensure that everyone in the organization can perform to their best. And by the way, this book, Servant Leadership, this concept of servant leadership, has been first brought to us by Robert Greenleaf back in 1977, so quite some time ago. And if you Google servant leadership today, you will find that there are tons and tons of books and articles and everything around this topic. And again, a quote on this one: "If serving is below you, leadership is beyond you." A third aspect in terms of leadership is, maybe not surprising coming from me, female leadership traits. And this is a short video. I'm not quite sure whether the audio comes through, but it doesn't really make a difference. If it happens, yes. Well, that's sort of a little bit light entertainment in my sort of fairly harsh presentation otherwise. But there is some truth to this, well, it's not only me saying that female leadership traits are important, and I'm explicitly using female leadership rather than leadership by women, because all of us have male and female traits within us. And it just so happens that in the past centuries, if not millennia, male traits have been highly valued over female traits. And so this list of these traits are the result of a research study with 300,000 participants, where they were asked what kind of leadership traits are required in the 21st century. And these are the top 10 that came out. And then the researchers went out to, again, another 300,000 people and said, would you say that these traits would you associate them with female traits or with male traits? And this is the result. And as you might guess, it's not my assessment, it's the assessment of 300,000 people. 8 out of these 10 traits that people consider essential for the 21st century are female leadership traits. And there's a book that talks more about the research called the Athena Doctrine. And then the final one is that we have to learn. We're talking, hopefully everyone is talking about sustainability, but if we are remembering that we are already using 160% of the planet's resources, sustaining that is clearly no longer an option. We need to go into regenerative mode as much as we can, which means we are needing to move from a mindset that focuses on ego to a mindset that focuses and supports the eco. Because otherwise all however much money and whatever else we have, it will be no use if there's no planet left. And I always like to say, I know there's a lot of money invested into getting to Mars, and if we are waiting long enough, we don't need to go to Mars. The conditions on this planet will be exactly the same, so we might as well use the resources here. And so I don't know how many of you are familiar or know of Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, who said, looking at the world through a sustainability lens not only helps us future-proof our supply chain, it also fuels innovation and drives brand growth. And increasingly there's a body of evidence in terms of research that those organizations that are purpose-driven, i.e. have a purpose beyond making profit for the shareholders, but seeking to make a contribution for all stakeholders, are completely outperforming those that focus only on the money. And the last one for in terms of leading post-COVID is we can differentiate between 5 different types of followers. The first are just sitting there waiting that someone comes to tell them what they need to do. The second go and come find you and say, boss, what shall I do? The third level is they come to you and say, boss, I'd like to do this, that, or the other. Is it okay? Level 4 would be they are just doing it and then come to you, boss, I've just done that. Is that all right? And level 5 is that they're just getting on with their job and you have occasional meetings to make sure that you are still aligned and heading in the same direction. And I believe it is a leader's responsibility today to make sure that as many of their followers as possible get up to level 4 and 5. And again, I could talk more about it, why that is so. But really, if we want to succeed in this fast-paced times, if we want to react in a speedy and timely manner, if we want to identify the opportunities and recognize the patterns, it is no longer enough for the boss to sit there and think it's his or her responsibility. We need to draw on the network of the organization and beyond if we want to be able to find all of those. And so putting it all together, we have the context of accelerated rate of change, connectivity, convergence, demanding customers, and the challenges to humanity on our planet that lead to a context that has unprecedented levels of complexity, which means that we need to learn to do things concurrently, collaborate, co-create, and be more caring. And the new leadership style that supports that kind of thing is about authenticity, serving, drawing more than before on female traits, focusing on regeneration, and make sure we are enabling our followers to do that. And with that, I'm 1 minute under 30. Of course, Giuseppe was a little bit worried that I had so many slides and would make it in half an hour.